continue our study in the book of Revelation, and it will be in chapter 18. Now, we've made a point over and over and over and over and over and over and over again that the book of Revelation is written in symbolic language. And as it's written in these symbols, it's teaching us in symbols. And so we need to look at it from the symbols that he gives us. And when we get into a lot of details of the symbols, then we are going to miss the point. It's kind of like the parables. You can take the parable of the mustard seed, and you can look at it, and there it is. Jesus explains that it starts out a small seed, grows into a big tree, and that really is the story. But now as you begin to look at a mustard tree, well, then you look at it, you see it has limbs, and then you see it has leaves out on the limbs. And when you start asking, well, what do those things mean? They really mean nothing at all in that parable. It's the symbol of starting out small and ending up with something that is great. And so it is with all of these symbols that he uses in the book of Revelation. And the symbol here that he's going to be talking about again tonight, that great harlot that we were introduced to last week when we studied in chapter 17. So I merely want to call your attention to just a brief review here tonight of this particular harlot. And that is, in the book of Revelation, there are two women that are given. These two women, one here is the harlot, but back in chapter 12, we were introduced to that faithful woman of God's people, that great, brilliant woman that had the 7 stars, the sun and the moon upon her head, and then he identifies that really as his faithful people or as his church. So now we have these two women. Now we've had this battle going on that we've been talking about here. It is between Jesus Christ and Satan, or as you look at it here on this earth, it is between the Roman government and the kingdom of God. Or you look at it in another way, and it is between this harlot and this faithful woman of God. And so the harlot being the thing that Satan is using, the woman of God is the thing or the church that God is using. Now, as you look at all of these, then you can see that they fall out really in that way. Now, who is the harlot in the book of Revelation? Last week we identified this, went into detail. We pointed out that Satan uses 3 forces to destroy his kingdom. The first force that he used is this brute force symbolized by the sea beast, that is the Roman Empire. And then he had that earth beast, there the Caesar worship that he used, that is religion. And then, last of all, and that's where this harlot comes in, he is using the lust of the flesh or the mind. And it's symbolized by that harlot that is there. So, as we look, we say, what does this harlot really mean, who's riding on this beast? Well, it's talking about Rome and all of its seductive powers there. Now, we, again, have seen this chart, and we know now what the sea is. In the Revelation 17 and verse 15, he identifies it, and he said, the sea now are the multitudes and nations and tongues. It represents the Roman Empire. As this beast comes out of this, or represents the people of the world, now out of this comes Rome, this great power that is trying to destroy the church of God. And then he uses various things, and one of them are the seductive powers. How all of the glamour and glitter and glow that Rome had, all of the wealth that Rome had, we talked about these to a great extent last week. That's what chapter 13 was about. It drew in the people to come in to become friends of Rome. Just like you could talk about Wall Street today, or some of the great cities today, that they are drawing people. How is it that Vegas draws all of these people in, has all of these millions and millions of dollars pass through that city every day? Well, it is through the seductive powers that it uses. Now, you could talk about Vegas or its seductive powers, but if we just said, well, Las Vegas has all of these planes coming in, has all of this money moving through it, just absolutely boggles your mind of the millions of dollars that go through there each and every day. What is there about Vegas that does that? Well, it's the seductive powers. It is the lust of the flesh of people thinking they come in, have a good time, get rich, and so forth. That's how they do all of this. And so you can't separate those two. And so this is the way that it is with Rome and this glitter and all the lust that she has. So now then, that really is what we are going to be talking about. And we were introduced to her this last week. Now the story of the harlot is in 3 sections. Last week we were introduced and describing her and her seductive powers. Tonight we're going to see her condemnation and her fall. That God can condemn her, and he says she's going to fall. Then next week we'll talk about the joys of heaven over her fall and her victory, and we'll see what happens then in there in chapter 19. So for tonight now, if you want to take your Bible, we'll just kind of take this section by section as we start looking at it. He starts out and he said, "In these things," he said, "after these things I saw another angel." Now after these things, this is the identification of the harlot. We've already seen identified in the last chapter that is here. She sat upon many waters, we learn. That is the world that she was on. She sat on a scarlet beast, the empire. Scarlet is the color of sin. She persecuted the saints. She sat on the beast of 7 heads, 7 mountains, which he said is 7 kings, which again is identifying Rome, that she was there. And it's a great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Well, what great city reigned over the kings of the earth at that time? It was the city of Rome. So now then, this harlot is setting up on Rome, just like this harlot is setting up on Vegas today. What draws people to Vegas? It is this worldly lust, seductive powers that's there. That's what drew people to Rome there. She was the wealthy captive of the world. Now then, he cries out. By the way, tonight, this lesson is going to be pretty simple. We're going to be taking it in chunks that's in here. That's the way that he puts it together to see it. Now, first of all, he cries out, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." Now again, Babylon, we've talked about it over and over and over again. If you're visiting with us tonight, I'm not trying to skip over anything, but I don't want to be boring because we've gone into the Old Testament scriptures and we've seen what that really represents, that Babylon was the great harlot of the Old Testament. And the book of Revelation uses all of those figures that people are already familiar with to show us what it is all about. So now then he says, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the harlot." Now, as he says, fallen, fallen is Babylon here, the harlot, or the great. That is a direct quote from Isaiah 21:9. Now, the interesting thing is that Isaiah said that 100 years before Babylon was destroyed. Now then you say, well, what is that talking about? That talks about that like she's already fallen. Fallen, fallen is Babylon that's in there. Well, Isaiah 46 there in verse 9 talks about how God declares the end from the beginning. That God can talk about the end of things as though it is an actual fact. It's just like the World Series is beginning now, and if I had the ability to look ahead and see, I could tell you, well, Boston has won the World Series. Or, if you're a Cardinal fan, Cardinals have won the World Series. But I look at it, I can't do that. I'm a human being. I can say they may do this or they may not, but God could. God could say, one's lost, one's fallen, because he has that ability to be able to know what those things are happening. So it is. This is language that was used in the Old Testament. That's what I want to keep emphasizing to you, to see we're not just making things up. We are trying to determine what the book of Revelation says, because by going back to the Old Testament, because it refers to those things 400 different times. And it's only by doing that that we're able to tell what it really means there. So, what he's saying is, Rome hadn't fallen yet. Rome is in the process of falling. Just like the World Series hasn't been played yet, but it's in the process of being played. Now, who's going to win it? Well, if I had the ability to look ahead and say, well, Boston has fallen. The Cardinals are the winners. That's what God is saying. The battle is on, but Satan has fallen. Rome has fallen. Just write it down. Remember, all the way through, God talks like this. Be thou faithful unto death, I will give unto you the crown of life. You just be faithful, God says, because I will be the victor that is there. Now, the same thing really was announced, has been announced earlier in this book, Revelation 14 and Revelation 16, that Rome would fall. So God is speaking in that kind of language. Now, he says, she, Rome, has become the dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. Now, as you're looking at this, what's he trying to say? What's going to happen to Rome? Rome is going to fall. Rome is going to lose its glamour. Rome is going to lose its glory. Rome is going to be destroyed. All we have to do is to go back in the pictures that we've seen before, and we take a look at Babylon of old in the Old Testament. There was never a city that ever existed on the face of the earth that could compare to Babylon. It was one of the seven wonders of the world. It had those hanging gardens that history tells us about that man can just try to imagine. But we see all of the foundations and so forth, and we can see the gates and things that they had, and it just boggles your mind of the glory, the splendor, the wealth. The world has never known it since then. Now, what has happened to it? Well, the prophet said, you're going to be a habitation for the jackals. All the wild beasts will be living in you. And you go there today, and that's exactly what has happened. Now then, this is what he's saying is going to happen to Rome. Rome, you're just falling down. The only thing that's left to you is just a place for the demons to live, for the unclean spirits, for every unclean and hateful bird, for the buzzards to live in. You know what happens when you see the buzzards flying around like this? They know that there's a dead body down there, and you know that. How would you like to be associated with buzzards? If you go get you a pet, you take that bird. He's had his head stuck in the intestines and so forth of roadkill animals all day long. Nauseating. This is what he's trying to say. He's trying to show us that is what Rome is really going to end up being all about. Now, it's going to be destroyed, and it's going to be filled with just evil stuff. That's all it is that's in there. Now, these hateful birds and predators and scavengers, that's Old Testament language. Isaiah 34:11 uses it and shows that. It's just trying to show us that Rome will fall and it will be destroyed totally and completely. Now then, why? For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality. Now, we've spent time talking about this. See, this is what we talked about the last week. Talked about how Rome offered this cup of wine, which is a cup of fornication and so forth. And so she now has got the nations, all the nations around, to be able to engage with her in all of this immorality and so forth. And so they've all committed fornication with her. That is, they've not been faithful to what God would have them to do there. So Rome has influenced the whole world that's there. Now, as you look at what Rome did, you can see about the decline. These are things we brought out before. And you can see what kind of a city Rome was, how rotten it was, and it was getting drunk and drunk and drunk. Divorce rate was rising taxes, craze for entertainment, military spending was on the rise, decay in religion, sports were rampant, violence is what they were calling for, and all of these things we're told in the history books is the condition of Rome, as she's called this great harlot. Now I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive her plagues." Now, look at this. He is not telling people to sell your property in Rome and move across the river to the outskirts, or to move over and out. That's not the thing he's talking about. He's talking about here getting out of this harlot. What do you mean? Get out of this lifestyle. Get out of this influence. If you're caught up in this thing, flee from it. Get away from it. Get out of it. If somebody were to come and talk with us right now and say, "Look, I'm caught up in going to Las Vegas every week. I need to fly there. I just love to go there and to gamble and to spend time with the harlots and to get drunk and to have all of this glory and to do all of these wonderful things. I'm just caught up in this. Now, if we said, well, you need to get out of Vegas, would we be talking about moving somewhere else? See, no, we're trying to talk about the thing that catches this person up in all of this. Get out of the gambling. Get out of this. Come out. Separate yourself from all of this. That's what he's telling them that they need to do, is to get out of her, get with everything, get out of that sin that they've been participating in. Now again, this is not new language because it's used of the Babylon of the Old Testament in Isaiah chapter 48. Go forth from Babylon, Isaiah says. Get out. Separate yourself from that city. We're told in the New Testament about unclean things. Come out from among them and touch no unclean thing. Now that is a command given in the Old Testament and again to you and me in the New Testament. Now let me ask you, are there unclean things in Monroe? Why, you'd say all around. There's all kind of ungodliness and cheats and thieves and perverts, and there's all kind of things here. Well, let's get out of it. God says, come ye out there. Okay, we're going to move from Monroe. So where do we go? Snohomish? Is there anything over there? Or Seattle? Or let's move to Portland? Or Dallas? Or New York? Where do you move? We've got to get out of it. Well, what do people do? In whatever city you're in, come you out from among this immorality, this ungodliness, this things that lead you astray. That's the point that he's trying to get at. Israel was told to leave Babylon. Isaiah told him to flee from the midst of Babylon. And each person, go to your own country. Get out of there. Get away from that. Remember what he's talking about here is the ungodly powers that's based on the lust of the flesh that's there. Now get out. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Now here is the kind of city Rome is. And you say, well, boy, so I look at all those sins, those are pretty bad. Well, where do we get them? We got them out of the book that's written to Rome. When Paul wrote to Rome, he described those people, and he said, now here's the kind of people that you have. And here it is. Now what do you do when you're caught up in idolatry, homosexuality, wickedness, greedy, full of envy, murder, and so forth, and you're living in that atmosphere? Come ye out from it. Get away from it. Because those things are going to be destroyed. That's what Rome was full of at that time. Now then he says, now not only that, I want you to come out from her and then pay her back even as she has paid, and give back to her double according to her deeds. For in the cup which she has mixed twice as much for her. Now remember, we've already talked about this cup. We've already talked about this cup that she's given all these people and all these nations and caused them to come in and sin with her. Now then, we're going to pay her back, God said. I want her paid back. Now I want you to notice two things in this verse right here. Pay her back even as she has paid. That means she's going to get what paid back for what she's done. Then he says, to her double to her deeds, twice as much for her. Now, that can mean exactly what we think it means when you read it the first time. That means give her back twice as much as she's given. But it can also mean something else. And you say, well, what else can it mean? Well, from other places, especially in the Old Testament, it's talked about on the basis of a scale. Now over here, if you take the scale that is down, that's where the weight is. All right, now let's say that we're going to weigh out the sins, and so the sins in Rome are real heavy, they're way down. Now then, we're going to mete out the punishment. How much punishment are we going to mete out? Read that first line. Pay her back even as she has paid. She's going to get the punishment that fits the crime. So now then, we put that much on there. Now, if we put that much on the other side, it'll even out that scale. It'll even out that scale. And you say, but how can that be called double? Well, let's try it in other things. Let's suppose that over on this one side over here, we put nails. Now then, if we want to, we put a pound of nails. If we want to even out that scale, how many nails do we have to put on the other side? We have to put a pound. So you've doubled the weight. You've doubled it. That's the way it's used in various places. And so it can mean either one, but I'm just trying to show you that's the way it's used in other places. And since it says pay her back even as she is paid, I think that's probably what it means, and then there'll be another statement that comes up a little bit more in the same way. But we've got to remember, you always reap what you sow. That is really what this is saying. That she's going to sow now, she's going to reap what she has sown. Now, generally, you reap more. Hosea talks about it. He said, if you sow the wind, if you cause problems like a wind, it's probably going to come back to you like a whirlwind or a tornado. In other words, you're probably going to end up suffering a whole lot worse than the problems that you have caused. But all that we're saying is, God is saying, now then, she's going to be paid back for this. And remember, God says, vengeance belongeth unto me, so it's a right thing for him to do that. Okay, now notice what he says. To the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, to the same degree give her torment. See, that's why I would say it's leveling out the balances. She's going to reap what she sowed. We're going to give her back what she has done. And mourning, for she say in her heart, here's the kind of person that she is, this harlot, I sat as a queen, I'm not a widow, and will never see mourning. Well, that's about the way these attitudes and dispositions live. If you went to Vegas and say, when will this city be laid waste? They would look at you and grin. How could it be? We've got a foundation of money like you've never seen anywhere else. Or if you want to talk about something else, talk about America. When will America be destroyed? When will we be laid waste? Why, that's a silly question. Who could possibly destroy us? We're the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. Haven't we been told that over and over and over and over again? Now, do we have the attitude that we set as a queen, we're not a widow, we'll not be destroyed, we're in a place of power? Well, that's the way Rome was there. So, I said as a queen, I'm not a widow. Now look, this is not something that's new that just came out of the book of Revelation. In Isaiah, he talked about there, Babylon, and he describes Babylon had said, I will be a queen forever. I will not set as a widow. Do you see why the writer of the book of Revelation uses this terminology? Is because all of this terminology has already been used in the Old Testament. All of these people were familiar with the Old Testament. They knew what it meant with Babylon. They knew what it meant that Babylon had fallen. And so God is just taking these same stories and he's telling it so that we can understand it. He talks about Nineveh in the Old Testament, who says in her heart, I am, and there's no one beside me. These mighty nations, these mighty countries that say, I am strong. There's no way anybody can conquer me. And we say, why would they say that? Well, America says it all the time, don't we? You see? And so it's just that attitude that you have there. And of course, we know what happens when we have that kind of a pride. Then he comes down and he says, now for this reason, in one day her plagues will come. pestilence and mourning and famine. So because she has this attitude, I now am going to destroy her. Now this in one day means a relatively short time. It's used over again here these 3 times in here, but it wasn't destroyed in one day. It was destroyed in a relatively short time that's in there. In 1 hour, judgment has come to her. We'll see that he says a little while later. Now, Rome experienced economic collapse after 185 A.D. That had been 85 years or so, you see, after this was written there. And you can read it in here. This is what the scholars tell us of how that it all happened there. It had a social decay and a financial collapse, and it went on the welfare dole and the weak military, and Christianity came in and had a great deal with destroying it. It was a divided empire, and on and on and on. It had all these things to come in on it, and finally it just disintegrated. The city of Rome, the nation of Rome, just disintegrated. Now then, notice I've jumped clear down to verse 20. So now, we say, why have we done that? All right, we've gone from verse 8 down to 20. Now then, I want to go back and I want us to note what these verses actually do. These verses in between describe a city that is fallen. That's all it does. It just tells what a city is like when a city is totally destroyed. And so let's read it here, some of it here, and we'll see what it's talking about in here. So he says in here, in verse 9, and the kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived wantonly with her shall weep and rail over when they look upon the smoke of her burning, and standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. So now he said, when Rome falls, kings, nations all over the world are going to stand in amaze, and they're going to mourn. They're going to mourn. You know, if America fell today, how would it affect other nations? And you might say, well, there's a lot of people that would like to see America fall, and there is. But if America fell, every nation on the face of this earth would go into economic disaster. It would just be something that you can't imagine, the disaster that would happen around the world if this one nation fell. That's how much influence we have. Now, how much did Rome have? Rome controlled the world. They ruled the world. Everybody dealt with Rome just like they deal with America. And so it says, they're all there. Woe, woe to her. 11, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. Just think what would happen if America failed. You could see that it would happen. Businesses all over the would collapse, and they would be in sorrow. Merchandise of gold and silver and precious stone and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet, all of fine wood, and every vessel of ivory, every vessel made of most precious wood, of brass and iron and marble. And now, if you say, wonder what that means. Wonder what iron means and wonder what marble means. He's just listing a whole lot of things. He's saying, I don't care what kind of business you're in, what kind of merchandising you have, you are going to lose your economic power. It's going to suffer because Rome's not going to be here to buy and sell. See? It's going to be a bad thing. And so he goes on. And cinnamon and spice and incense and ointment and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and cattle and sheep. And the merchandise of horses and chariots and slaves and the souls of men. Even slavery. People that's involved in that horrible thing, they're going to whine, they're going to complain, because no longer do they have this slave merchant that buys up here. And the fruit which thy soul lusted after are gone from thee. So all of this fruit which you lusted after, all of this fruit, if America fell, think of all of the money that people lust after trying to do business with us, and no longer can they do business. See? And so all of this here that they lusted after, and all things that were dainty and sumptuous and perish from thee, and men shall find them no more. And merchants of these, and the merchants of these things who were made rich by her shall stand off for the fear of her torment, weeping and mourning and saying, Woe, woe, the great city, she that was arrayed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stone and pearls, for in 1 hour so great riches is made desolate, and every shipmaster and every one that saileth anywhere, and the mariners and the manyest gained their living by the sea stood afar off, and cried out as they looked over the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like the great city? And they cast dust upon their head, and cried, and weeping and mourning, and saying, Woe, woe, the great city, wherein all that had their ships in the sea were made rich by reason of her costliness. And in 1 hour she had made desolate. In 1 hour she is made desolate. So it's a description of how the world would be hurt and how they would cry and mourn when Rome then fell. Now then, we're down here to verse 20. He said, Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye saints, and ye apostles, and ye prophets, for God hath judged your judgment upon her. So he said, I want you now to rejoice, all the righteous people, because finally God is going to destroy her, and she's going to go straight into that sea. Rome is going to be gone. Now, how does he describe it in here? In verse 21, And the strong angel took up a stone, as it were a great millstone, and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with the mighty fall shall Babylon the great city be cast down and found no more. So the picture is like this. Here is a great angel. He picks up a great millstone, and he throws it into the ocean. Now, you pick up a rock like that, you throw it into the ocean, what happens? It goes to the bottom. He said, that is what is going to happen to Rome. Now, as you see that millstone, here it is. We take a look at one, an actual millstone. There's an actual picture that they still have over there. That's what those millstones look like. They weighed thousands of pounds. And you'd have to have a spindle in the middle, and then have it out there where a donkey had to pull it to go around to crush the grain that is in there. And so in order to show how Rome is going to be destroyed, an angel said is going to pick up that millstone, throw it in there, and show you that's what's going to happen in there. So Babylon, the great city, will be found no longer then. Rome, as the head of the empire, never rose again once it fell. Regarding Babylon, this is the original Babylon. This is the old one back in the Old Testament. Look what Jeremiah said. As soon as you finish reading this scroll, you will tie a stone to it and throw it into the middle of the Euphrates and say, Just so shall Babylon sink down and not rise again. And so here it is. Jeremiah used the same terminology that the book of Revelation is using. I think you begin to see, as I said, 400 times, over 400 times, the book of Revelation refers back into the Old Testament scriptures, which helps us see what they're talking about here. Now then, he goes ahead and he said in verse 22, he said, And the voice of the harpers and the minstrels and the flute players and the trumpets shall be heard no more, and no more craftsmen of whatever craft shall be found in thee anymore, and the voice of the mill. And he just said everything is going to be shut down. Once a nation is destroyed, then everything comes to an end. Now then, verse 24. And in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints, and all that have been slain upon the earth. That's a kind of unusual statement that's made. But it shows the kind of nation that Rome was. Now, to compare it, in Jesus' day, in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus said that upon this generation would come all the blood from Abel to Zechariah. In other words, Jesus talking to the generation in which he lived I remember Jesus lived from 0 to 33 A.D., and this book would be written somewhere, say around 90 A.D., some 60 years later. Now then, in Jesus' day, Jesus said, telling that generation of people, that generation of which he said, you scribes, you Pharisees, you hypocrites, and he's telling them how bad they are. He said, upon you shall come all the blood of the Old Testament. Now then, why? Well, because your fathers shed that blood, but you have the same disposition and the same attitude. You've never, ever changed it. You still have the same ungodly disposition, attitude that they have, so you're going to suffer for it. Now, if a nation has had this ungodly attitude and done all these terrible, horrible things, and then you come down, let's say, to our time, and we have the same thing. We believe in the same thing. We'd kill the same kind of people. Well, we're the same kind of people, and this generation, Jesus said, is going to suffer for it. And what did he do to that generation? In 70 A.D., he destroyed that generation. See? He destroyed it. Now then, we're starting out, and here it is now. We've got the same statement that is made about Rome in here. And that is, the generation that had the same attitude and dispositions there, they were guilty. Now, Rome's attitude toward God is the kind that is responsible for the death of every righteous person that ever lived on earth. Rome was filled with all of the sins, the ungodliness, the attitudes, the dispositions of everything that caused every person to ever die who had ever lived. See? And so he said, that's what you're like, and that's the reason that you are going to be destroyed. So as we close with chapter 18, the great harlot here, Babylon and Rome, Babylon in the Old Testament, Rome in the New Testament, they're both destroyed. They're both gone. There are pictures of both of them. But the kingdom of God continues right on. That's what the book of Revelation has been about from its first chapter down to now. We've repeated over and over and over again. There is this battle. God will win. And what is your job? He told them at that time, your job is be thou faithful. And I'll show you how the battle turns out. Now, as the same things go about today, we understand the same God is in heaven. He has the same attitude that he had back there. What's our job? What's our job? Again, it's be thou faithful. God is in control.